The poor girl's wrong suitcase forced the cold CEO millionaire to confront the partner who betrayed him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main characters. Emily had always been a girl who made the best out of the little she had. Born into a modest family, she didn't have the luxury of designer bags or expensive accessories, but she had an undeniable charm that made her stand out in any crowd. She worked as a part-time barista at a local coffee shop in New York, saving every penny she could for her dream of moving out of her tiny apartment and into a place she could truly call her own. One fateful evening, after a long day at work, Emily found herself rushing to catch a flight to visit her sick mother in another state. In the midst of the airport chaos, as she hurried through the crowded terminal, she accidentally grabbed the wrong suitcase. It wasn't her usual worn-out carry-on, but instead, a sleek, polished suitcase with a gold-plated tag reading David Monroe. Unaware of the mix-up, Emily hurriedly made her way to her gate. Meanwhile, David Monroe, a cold and calculating billionaire CEO, was wrapping up a high-stakes meeting with his business partners. With his sharp suit, steely gaze, and reputation for being ruthless in the boardroom, David's personal life was as meticulously organized as his business empire. But as he prepared to leave the office and head for the airport, something unexpected happened. His suitcase went missing. His frustration grew as he searched the terminal, but it was no use. Little did he know that the suitcase he'd lost contained a set of crucial documents that could make or break his upcoming business deal with one of his most trusted partners. As Emily sat down in her seat, she finally opened the suitcase she thought was hers, only to find a collection of documents, folders, and files with the name David Monroe stamped all over them. Panic set in as she realized the mix-up. She had no idea who David Monroe was, but she immediately understood the gravity of the situation. The suitcase wasn't hers, and she had just unknowingly become involved in something far bigger than she could have imagined. She felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. She had to get this suitcase back to its rightful owner, but what if David Monroe was a powerful businessman who would get angry at her mistake? She feared the worst. David, on the other hand, was already making his way through the airport, trying to find any clue about his missing luggage. His phone buzzed. His assistant was calling with an urgent message. One of his business partners had just betrayed him, leaking confidential information about his deal. The betrayal hit David like a punch to the gut. As his mind raced with thoughts of retribution, he noticed something in his peripheral vision, a woman struggling to manage a large suitcase in the crowded terminal. Was that his suitcase? His heart skipped a beat. He quickly approached her, and the moment their eyes met, Emily's stomach twisted with nervousness. She had no idea that her wrong suitcase would lead her to face David Monroe, a man who was about to confront not just the mistake she had made, but the much bigger issue of betrayal that was threatening his empire. As David approached Emily, his eyes narrowed. There was no mistaking it. The suitcase she was struggling with was his. He had seen it a million times before. The sleek design, the gold-plated tag, the perfect fit for a man who always had his life meticulously organized. His mind raced. How had she ended up with it? Was it an accident? Or was there something more to it? Emily looked up and froze when she saw the cold, calculating expression on David's face. She felt her heart skip a beat. She had known this moment would come, but the reality of it was worse than she had imagined. David Monroe, the billionaire CEO, stood before her, and she was the one holding the key to a situation she had no idea how to resolve. She opened her mouth to apologize, but the words caught in her throat. She was trying to think clearly, but her thoughts were jumbled. "Excuse me," David said in a voice so calm, it made Emily uneasy. "That's my suitcase." Emily blinked, her mind catching up. I didn't mean to take it. It's an accident. I'm so sorry." Her voice trembled slightly, and she mentally cursed herself for sounding so nervous. She had never felt this out of place in her entire life. David's gaze softened for just a fraction of a second, but only enough for Emily to notice. He took a step closer, his expression unreadable. "I'm David Monroe. And this," He gestured toward the suitcase. Is very important to me. Emily nodded quickly. I understand. I wasn't trying to. She stopped herself. She didn't need to explain her mistake, especially not to a man who seemed so out of her league. Do you mind if we sit down and talk for a minute? David asked. Emily hesitated for a second, then agreed, her stomach churning with the discomfort of the situation. She couldn't even imagine how he was feeling right now, his important suitcase being in the wrong hands. They both sat down at a nearby bench. David placed his hand on the suitcase, a silent indication that he wanted to get it back. Emily noticed the sharp lines of his suit and the way his eyes seemed to pierce through her. It made her uncomfortable, but she forced herself to focus. I'm really sorry, Emily said again, trying to keep her voice steady. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I just grabbed the wrong one. I'm on my way to visit my mother, and I was rushing. I didn't realize, she trailed off, unsure of what else to say. David listened, his face impassive, but there was something in his eyes that made Emily uneasy. A mixture of frustration, confusion, and something else she couldn't quite read. It's just a mistake, he said, his voice still controlled, but there was an edge to it now. Emily nodded, but she felt a strange pressure in the air between them. I'm not usually one to let things slide, David continued, his voice low, but I'll make an exception for you. But I need you to understand something. What's in that suitcase? It's not just important to me. It's important to a lot of people. Emily swallowed hard. She had no idea what he was talking about, but she felt the weight of his words. Something told her this wasn't just about a misplaced suitcase. There was far more at stake than she could have imagined. She could feel the tension building between them, and she could tell David was holding back something. But what? I'm not asking for your help, David said after a moment, his voice colder now. But whatever happens next, you're already involved. The words hung in the air, and Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She had no idea what she had gotten herself into, but it was clear now that this mistake was about to lead her down a path she could never have predicted. David's words lingered in the air, leaving Emily feeling more uneasy than she ever had before. She had no idea what she had just stumbled into, but it was clear that her simple mistake was now connected to something far larger than she could comprehend. She looked at David, trying to read his expression, but it was like looking at a stone wall, cold, unreadable, and impenetrable. I didn't mean to get involved in any of this, Emily finally said, her voice a little more steady than before, but still shaky. I swear, I didn't know what was in the suitcase. I didn't realize how important it was. David's eyes softened for a moment, just a flicker of something human behind the icy exterior. He let out a quiet sigh, rubbing his temples as if trying to push through a headache. I know you didn't, he said, his tone softening slightly, though still firm. But now you are. And there's no going back. Emily's heart raced. What did he mean by that? She wasn't a part of his business, not in any way. She was just a girl trying to make her way through life. But somehow, in this moment, she felt the weight of his words pressing down on her. David stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. We need to talk. It's not just about a misplaced suitcase anymore. There are things at play here that you don't understand. People are counting on me to fix this, and I need to know that you're not going to make it worse. Emily stood up too, her legs unsteady but her resolve beginning to form. I won't. I promise. I just want to help. David looked at her for a long moment, his gaze piercing through her. He seemed to be measuring her, deciding whether or not to trust her. Finally, he spoke. All right, here's what I need you to do. I need you to come with me. The words caught her off guard. Come with you, Emily repeated, confused. Where? We're going to meet with someone who can help us, David said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. And you need to be there. Emily hesitated. She was nervous, terrified even, but something inside her told her that this was the only way she could make things right. Okay, she said quietly. David didn't wait for her to say anything else. He turned on his heel and started walking toward the exit of the terminal, and Emily followed him. Her heart was pounding in her chest as they moved through the crowd, her mind racing. Who was this person David was meeting? What was at stake? She had no answers, and the more she tried to think about it, the more confused she became. As they stepped into the sleek black car waiting for them outside, David's silence was unnerving. Emily sat in the back seat, trying to collect her thoughts. The tension between them was palpable, and it felt like the walls were closing in on her. What had she gotten herself into? They drove in silence for what felt like an eternity, the city flashing by in a blur. Emily couldn't help but glance at David every few seconds, wondering what was going through his mind. Finally, after what felt like hours, they arrived at a modern office building. It was sleek, cold, and intimidating, just like David. "This is it," David said, as if reading her thoughts. "Stay close to me, and don't say anything unless I ask you to." Emily nodded, feeling a knot form in her stomach. She had no idea what she was about to walk into, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life had just taken a turn she never could have anticipated. As Emily stepped out of the car and onto the cold marble floor of the sleek office building, she felt a wave of unease wash over her. The building was nothing like she had ever seen before, modern, intimidating, and spotless. Every corner seemed to echo with power, and the people walking around her were dressed in business suits that looked far too expensive for her taste. She felt out of place, like an outsider in a world that wasn't meant for someone like her. David led the way without a word, his presence commanding attention as he moved through the lobby with a steady, unshakable confidence. Emily followed him closely, trying to keep up, though her mind was racing with questions. What was happening? Who was this person they were about to meet? And why was David so determined to bring her into the middle of it all? As they entered an elevator, the doors slid shut silently, and the tension between them seemed to intensify. Emily stood awkwardly beside David, the silence heavy and thick in the small space. She couldn't help but steal glances at him, trying to figure him out. His cold, polished exterior was hard to read, but she could sense the undercurrent of something more, something deeper and more troubled lurking beneath the surface. The elevator reached the top floor with a soft chime, and the doors opened to reveal a spacious, luxurious office. The walls were lined with glass windows that overlooked the city, and a large desk sat in the middle of the room. Behind it stood a man in his early 40s, dressed in a sharp suit that matched the elegance of the room. He had an air of authority about him, but there was something about his posture that suggested he wasn't used to being challenged. David walked in first, his face neutral as always, and Emily followed him, trying to keep her nerves in check. The man behind the desk looked up from his papers, his expression unreadable as he took in their presence. "David," the man said coolly, his voice low and controlled. "You've come." David didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need your help," he said, his voice firm but laced with something Emily couldn't quite place. Desperation, maybe, or frustration. The man leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he studied David, then glanced at Emily. "And why is she here?" he asked, his gaze narrowing. David didn't hesitate. "She's involved," he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "She's the reason this situation hasn't completely spiraled out of control." The man's eyebrows shot up, a flicker of surprise passing across his face. "I see," he said slowly, eyeing Emily as if trying to figure out what role she could possibly play in all of this. Emily felt the weight of his gaze, and her unease grew. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but she had no doubt that she was caught up in something far bigger than herself. "What exactly do you need from me?" the man behind the desk asked, his voice now sharp and focused on David. "We need to stop the leak," David said, his eyes never leaving the man's face. "We need to find the traitor before it's too late." Emily's heart pounded as she tried to absorb what was happening. She had no idea what David was talking about, but she could tell by the seriousness in his voice that the stakes were high. The man at the desk remained silent for a moment, clearly weighing his options. "All right," he finally said, standing up and moving toward the desk. "We'll handle this quietly. But remember, David, if this goes wrong, there's no turning back." David nodded, his face hardening once again. "I'm aware." As the man turned to his computer to begin gathering information, Emily stood there, feeling like a spectator in a world she didn't understand. She had never imagined her life would take a turn like this, all because of one wrong suitcase. As David stood beside her, his face a mask of resolve, Emily realized that whatever was coming next, there was no turning back for her either. As the man behind the desk turned his attention to the computer screen, the low hum of the office surrounded them. David remained silent, his posture straight and stiff, but Emily could feel the tension radiating off him. She had no idea what was going on, but she could sense that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than a simple suitcase mix-up. The man at the desk typed quickly, scanning the data on his screen with a focused intensity. "The leak is coming from inside," he said after a moment, his voice low but clear. "There's no way we're going to trace it to the source unless we move quickly. We can't risk it spreading any further." David nodded, his jaw tight. "How long do we have?" The man didn't look up as he continued typing. "A day, maybe less. If the information gets into the wrong hands, everything's done. The deal, the company, everything we've worked for." David's eyes darkened, his face hardening as if the weight of those words was finally sinking in. Emily stood there, feeling like an outsider, caught in the middle of a world of business and betrayal she couldn't understand. Her pulse quickened, and her thoughts swirled in confusion. What was this all about? What did David have to lose? Who was he fighting against? "What do you need from me?" the man asked, turning his attention back to David. "We need eyes on the inside," David replied. "I need you to dig deeper. Find out who is behind this leak. I don't care how you do it." Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she listened to their conversation. It was clear now that this wasn't just about business. There was something far more personal at stake here, something David wasn't saying. "I'll get started immediately," the man said, standing up from his chair. "But remember, David, this could get ugly. People will notice if we go too far." David's eyes flashed with a cold intensity. "Then we make sure it doesn't get out of hand." As the man walked toward the door, Emily couldn't help but wonder what exactly David had been involved in. She had never imagined her life would intersect with something so dangerous. David turned to her, his expression softening just a fraction, though still serious. "You should go," he said quietly. "This is going to get complicated." Emily opened her mouth to argue, to say that she didn't want to be left in the dark, but the words died in her throat. She had no idea what she had just stepped into, and the last thing she wanted to do was make things worse. "I can't leave," she said instead, her voice firm despite the uncertainty that gripped her. "I'm already involved, aren't I?" David didn't respond immediately. He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You're right. But you need to understand that things are going to get more dangerous from here on out. It's not just about the suitcase anymore. It's about trust, betrayal, and the future of everything I've built." Emily swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. She had no idea how she had gotten herself into this, but now that she was here, there was no turning back. She nodded, trying to steady herself. "So what now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Now we wait. And we prepare. The next move is critical." Emily felt her stomach twist in nervous anticipation. She had no idea what was coming next, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life would never be the same again. David's office felt suffocatingly silent as the man left, the door clicking shut behind him. Emily stood there, processing everything that had happened in the last few hours. Her mind was reeling, trying to make sense of this tangled web she had become entangled in. She had gone from a quiet life, working hard to save enough money to visit her sick mother, to being involved in what seemed like a high-stakes corporate conspiracy. It felt like she was being pulled deeper and deeper into a world she knew nothing about. David stood by the window, looking out at the city skyline. His figure was tense, his broad shoulders rigid, as if the weight of the world rested on him. Emily could see the toll this was taking on him, even if he refused to show it. "Do you ever stop?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. David turned, his eyes locking onto hers. His expression softened slightly, but there was still a hardness to his gaze. "No," he said simply. "There's always something else. Someone else to betray you, something else to lose." Emily felt a pang of sympathy, but also a deep sense of confusion. She wanted to ask him more, to understand why everything seemed so urgent, so dangerous. But the words stuck in her throat. "I didn't sign up for this," she said, more to herself than to him. "I didn't ask for any of this to happen." David looked at her for a long moment, his gaze flickering between her eyes and the floor. "I know," he said finally, his voice quieter now, almost reluctant. "But you're in it now, whether you want to be or not." Emily nodded, her mind still struggling to comprehend the situation. She felt like she was drowning in a sea of uncertainty, unsure of what her next move should be. Just then, the door to David's office opened again, and a woman stepped in. She was tall, with sharp features and a professional, yet intimidating, presence. Her eyes flickered toward Emily briefly before locking onto David. "We have a problem," the woman said, her voice low and controlled. David's expression hardened again, the brief moment of vulnerability vanishing as if it had never existed. "What kind of problem?" he asked. The woman glanced at Emily, then back at David. "The leak," she said. "It's worse than we thought. Someone inside the company is working with the enemy. We've narrowed it down to a few suspects, but we need to act fast." Emily's stomach twisted with a new sense of fear. She had no idea who these people were or what they were talking about, but she knew that the situation was spiraling out of control. David's eyes darkened. "Do we have a plan?" he asked, his tone cold and calculating. The woman nodded. "We're setting up a meeting with one of the suspects tonight. We'll see if we can get them to slip up. But it's risky. They'll be expecting something." "I don't care," David replied, his voice sharp. "Do it." Emily watched the exchange with a mixture of awe and anxiety. There was a ruthlessness in David that she hadn't seen before, a cold determination that seemed to drive everything he did. As the woman turned and left, Emily was left alone with David once again. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, and she found herself standing in the center of a storm she had never expected. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Now we wait. And we plan." Emily nodded, though her mind was still spinning. She had no idea what her role was in all of this, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer just a bystander. She was part of something much bigger than herself, and there was no turning back. The hours passed slowly, and Emily's anxiety only grew as she sat in the stark, sterile room. The atmosphere was thick with tension. David's plan was set in motion, and she had no choice but to wait. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly time for the meeting with the suspect, the one who might be the key to unraveling everything. The company, David's empire, was at risk, and Emily couldn't help but feel that she was being pulled deeper into a situation that was far beyond her control. David had barely said a word since the woman left. He stood by the window, his face a mask of concentration. The last thing Emily had seen in him was vulnerability, but now it was replaced by an intensity she hadn't expected. His mind was clearly elsewhere, focusing on the next move, the next step in a game she had no understanding of. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked quietly, her voice uncertain, though a part of her didn't want to go. She felt oddly tethered to him. Despite how out of place she felt in this world of corporate secrets and betrayals. David didn't look at her. "No," he said shortly, his tone clipped. "You're involved whether you want to be or not. Just stay out of the way." Emily nodded, trying to suppress the rising unease in her stomach. She wasn't used to this kind of life. Danger, corporate maneuvering, being caught in a web of lies and deceit. This wasn't the world she knew. But now, she realized, she didn't have a choice. "What happens after the meeting?" she asked, trying to get some clarity. David's gaze flickered to hers briefly, but he didn't respond immediately. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, Emily thought he might not answer. "We'll know who we're really dealing with," he said finally, his voice cold and distant. "And we'll deal with them accordingly." Emily shivered, not entirely sure what that meant, but she could tell by the finality in his voice that there would be no turning back once the meeting took place. David's eyes narrowed as he checked his watch, his body language rigid. The clock ticked away the minutes, and the anticipation in the air grew heavier. She could feel it in her bones, the calm before the storm. David's calmness was unsettling, almost as if he had accepted that this was the only way forward. Emily had no idea who the suspect was, but something told her that the person they were meeting tonight wasn't just a random business partner or a mole in the company. This was personal. As if on cue, the door opened, and the woman from earlier entered the room, her face set in determination. She nodded toward David. "It's time," she said. David stood up immediately, his expression hardening. He looked at Emily one last time. "Stay here. Do not come into the meeting room unless I say so." Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. She wanted to argue, to demand answers, but she didn't. This was his world, and she was just a passenger. David walked past her, and for a brief moment, Emily caught a glimpse of the man he truly was. The determination, the coldness, the ruthless ambition, it was all there, masked by the polished exterior. She had seen the cracks in the facade, but they were only temporary. He was a man on a mission, and nothing would stop him. Emily stood there, the weight of the silence pressing down on her. She glanced at the door, wondering what was happening behind it, but she couldn't bring herself to open it. The tension was palpable, and she felt every second slip by, knowing that the course of everything, her life, David's business, their fragile connection, was about to change forever. The minutes dragged on, and Emily could feel the weight of her own thoughts pressing down on her. She sat alone in the cold, sterile room, her mind racing with unanswered questions. What exactly was happening behind that door? What was David really trying to protect, and why had she been dragged into all of this? She had never imagined that one simple mistake could lead to something this complex, this dangerous. Her heart raced as she replayed the events of the past few days in her head. Everything had shifted so quickly. She had gone from a quiet, ordinary life to being caught in the middle of a corporate conspiracy, involved with a man who seemed to be hiding more than just business secrets. As she sat there, trying to collect her thoughts, the door opened again, and David stepped back into the room. His expression was unreadable, as it always was, but there was something about the way he held himself that made Emily's stomach tighten with unease. He didn't look at her right away. Instead, he walked over to the desk and stood there, his back to her. The silence stretched between them, and Emily's anxiety grew. "You're not going to tell me what happened, are you?" she finally asked, her voice softer than she intended. David didn't turn around at first. For a moment, it seemed like he hadn't even heard her. Then, slowly he spoke. "No," he said, his voice cold and distant. "It's better. You don't know." Emily's chest tightened at his words. It was the same answer he always gave whenever she asked about what was really going on, and it only made her more determined to understand. "I'm involved now, David," she said, standing up from her seat. "You can't just keep me in the dark. I need to know what's going on." David finally turned to face her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "It's not something you need to worry about," he said, his tone sharp. "I told you before, this isn't your problem." But Emily wasn't ready to back down. She had already stepped so far into his world, and now there was no going back. "I'm already in the middle of it," she said, her voice firmer now. "And whether you like it or not, I have a right to know what's happening. You can't just use me and expect me to stay quiet." The room seemed to grow colder as David's gaze hardened. He took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. "You're involved because of your mistake," he said, his voice low but intense. "This isn't a game, Emily. People's lives are at stake." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had never considered the consequences of what she had done, not fully. She had just grabbed the wrong suitcase, after all. But now she realized that her mistake had set off a chain of events far beyond what she could have imagined. David's eyes softened just a fraction, but his expression was still serious. "I can't afford to have any more mistakes, not now," he continued, his voice quieter but no less firm. "You need to understand that the situation is far more dangerous than you think." Emily swallowed hard, trying to process everything. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. David hesitated for a moment, then walked toward the door. "Now," he said, "we move forward. We have no choice." Emily stood there, watching him leave, feeling like she was standing on the edge of something massive, something she had no control over. She had no idea what David was planning, but she knew one thing. Her life had changed forever. Whatever came next, she would be in it, whether she was ready or not. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and carefully orchestrated plans. Emily had no idea how much longer she could keep up with the pace. She had barely any sleep, and the weight of the situation felt heavier by the minute. Every time she tried to ask David more about what was really going on, he shut her down with the same cold, impersonal response. "You don't need to know," he would say, his tone sharp, but his eyes betraying a hint of something deeper, something he wasn't ready to share. Emily knew better than to push him too hard, but the questions gnawed at her. What was he really fighting for? Who was he protecting? And, most importantly, where did she fit into all of this? One evening, after another long, exhausting day, David called her into his office. She had grown accustomed to the tension in the air when she entered, but tonight, something felt different. There was an urgency to his movements, a sense that whatever was about to happen would change everything. "Sit down," he said, his voice unusually steady. Emily took a seat across from him, feeling the familiar unease in her chest. "We have a problem," he began, leaning forward, his hands clasped on the desk in front of him. "The leak has spread further than we thought. It's no longer just about the company. There are people involved who have their own agendas. And those agendas are about to collide with ours." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her attempt to stay calm. "I mean that the stakes have gotten higher," David replied. "People are making moves behind the scenes. They're trying to take us down." Emily couldn't hide the shock on her face. "Who are these people?" she asked, feeling like she was drowning in a sea of unknowns. David's gaze was hard as he looked at her. "I'm not sure yet, but I know who we can trust and who we can't. And right now, the only person I trust to help me clean this up is you." Emily blinked, not sure if she had heard him right. "Me?" she repeated, incredulous. "I'm not a part of this world, David. I don't know how to fix this." David stood up, walking over to the window, his back to her. "You're already in it, whether you like it or not," he said quietly. "And right now, I need someone who isn't tangled in the web of lies. Someone who can think clearly." Emily felt a surge of panic rise in her chest. She didn't know what he was asking of her, but she could sense the gravity of the situation. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. David turned back to face her, his eyes locked onto hers. "I need you to help me find the mole," he said, his tone unwavering. "The one who's been feeding information to the enemy. We need to act fast." Emily nodded slowly, her mind spinning. She had no idea what she was getting herself into, but there was no turning back now. She was already involved, deeper than she had ever wanted to be. And now, she had to make a choice: stay in the shadows or step forward and help David fight a battle that could cost them both everything. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "I'll help," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "But I need to know everything. I can't help if I don't understand the full picture." David studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right," he said. "I'll tell you what you need to know. But you need to be ready for what comes next." As Emily nodded, she felt the weight of his words settle deep within her. Whatever was coming, she knew it would change everything. And this time, there was no going back. David leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Emily could feel the tension in the air between them, as if the weight of the moment was pressing down on both of them. She had agreed to help him, to find the person responsible for the leak, but now that she was in this position, she wasn't sure what she had signed up for. David's sharp eyes never left hers. "We can't trust anyone," he said, his voice low. "The people who want to bring me down have already infiltrated the company, and we have no time to waste." Emily's heart raced. She had never been involved in anything like this before. She wasn't a businesswoman, wasn't trained for corporate espionage. She had made a mistake, grabbing the wrong suitcase, and now, somehow, that mistake had led her here, in the middle of a battle between unseen forces. "What exactly do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David's gaze softened for a moment, a rare flicker of emotion in his eyes. "I need you to use your instincts," he said. "We're going to start by looking at the people closest to me, the ones I trusted. We'll see who's been playing both sides." Emily swallowed hard. The thought of digging into the lives of the people around David made her uneasy. She had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went, but she knew she couldn't back out now. "Okay," she said, trying to steady her nerves. "How do we start?" David's gaze shifted to the laptop in front of him. "We'll start with the emails," he said. "The ones that were sent just before and after the leak. We'll trace the source of the information." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of the task ahead of her. She was out of her depth, but there was no turning back. David clicked a few buttons on the laptop, pulling up a list of emails. The subject lines were nothing out of the ordinary: meeting notes, project updates, business proposals. But as Emily began to read through them, a sense of unease started to settle in. Each email was a small piece of a much larger puzzle. "These are all business-related," Emily said, scanning the screen. "But there's something off about them. It's like these people are playing a game." David's lips curled into a small, wry smile. "That's exactly what's happening," he said. "A game I've been losing, but not anymore. We're going to take back control." Emily glanced at him, wondering just how far he was willing to go to win this game. She didn't know what he meant by taking control, but she was beginning to realize that she was caught up in something much bigger than herself. There was no escaping it. "Who are these people?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. David hesitated before answering. Some are competitors, others are former allies who've turned against me. And there's one person in particular I'm watching closely. Emily's curiosity piqued. Who? She asked. David looked at her, his eyes darkening. Someone I thought I could trust. Someone who's been with me for years. But now, I'm not so sure. Emily's stomach tightened. She had always believed that loyalty was something that could be trusted. But now, in this world of corporate deception and hidden agendas, it seemed like loyalty was the first thing to be betrayed. So, what's the plan? She asked, trying to stay focused. David stood up, his movements sharp and purposeful. We'll dig deeper, he said, his voice steady. We'll get the truth, no matter how dangerous it gets. Emily nodded, her resolve hardening. She didn't know what she had gotten herself into, but she wasn't going to back out now. This was bigger than her mistake with the suitcase. This was about survival, loyalty, and trust. And she was going to be part of it, whether she was ready or not. David's office was filled with the quiet hum of the air conditioning as Emily sat across from him, staring at the screen in front of her. The emails they had pulled up weren't helping as much as they had hoped. The sender addresses were all encrypted, and the subject lines seemed benign, just routine business correspondence. But David's intuition told him otherwise. This is more complicated than I thought, Emily said, her voice tinged with frustration. I don't see anything that stands out. David remained silent, his eyes scanning the screen with an intensity that made Emily feel like he could see something she couldn't. Sometimes, he said after a moment, the most important pieces are hidden in plain sight. Emily frowned. What do you mean? People don't realize how easy it is to hide things in plain view, David explained, leaning forward. They assume no one will look closely enough. They assume the noise will drown out the signal. Emily thought about that for a moment. It made sense in a way. Sometimes the simplest details were the hardest to spot, and people got too comfortable thinking they could hide their tracks. She glanced back at the emails and decided to approach them differently. Instead of looking at them individually, she started scanning for patterns. The same names appeared in multiple emails, always involved in some of the most sensitive business matters, but with no real connection to the projects at hand. Wait, she said, her voice rising slightly. Look at this. David leaned in closer as she pointed to one particular email thread. The name on the other end was familiar, someone David had trusted for years. I didn't expect him, David muttered, his eyes narrowing. He's been with me from the beginning. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. Is he the one? She asked. David didn't answer immediately. He stared at the screen for a moment, his mind clearly working through the implications of what Emily had just uncovered. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but steady. It's possible. Emily swallowed. The idea that someone so close to David, someone he had trusted, could be involved in something this dangerous was unsettling. What now? She asked, almost afraid of the answer. David's expression hardened. We need to get to the bottom of this. We need to find out how deep this goes. His words were decisive, but Emily could hear the tension in his voice. She had seen him calm, collected, and even ruthless when needed, but there was something raw in his tone now. He wasn't just fighting for his business anymore. He was fighting for his entire world. What's the next step? She asked, trying to steady herself. David looked at her, his gaze unwavering. We confront him, but we can't be impulsive. We need to make sure we have all the evidence before we take any action. Emily nodded, her heart racing. The thought of confronting someone as powerful as David's trusted associate made her uneasy, but she knew there was no turning back. She was in this now, whether she was ready or not. We'll have to be careful, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. One wrong move, and everything could fall apart. David gave a short nod, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. Exactly, he said. But we don't have the luxury of time. Every minute we waste brings us closer to losing everything. The weight of his words hung in the air, and Emily felt the full extent of what they were up against. There was no room for mistakes. This wasn't just about a corporate deal anymore. It was about survival. They had to outsmart their enemies, and they had to do it fast. David stood up, turning away from the screen. We'll gather more intel. Tomorrow, we make our move. Emily felt a surge of determination rising in her chest. She was scared, yes, but she also knew one thing for certain. She couldn't back out now. Whatever happened next, she would face it head on, alongside David. They were in this together. And together, they would find the truth. She had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear: the game had just begun. The following day, the tension in the air was palpable. Emily had barely slept, her mind racing with the implications of the situation. She kept replaying the conversation with David over and over in her head, trying to make sense of it all. Her role in this was still unclear, but one thing was certain: she was in this now, whether she was ready or not. David's plan was simple: gather more intel, and then confront the person who had been feeding information to their competitors. But the uncertainty lingered, like a dark cloud, hovering over everything they did. Emily sat across from David in his office, watching as he went through files, his face tense with concentration. He was still the same calculating man, but today, there was something different about him. His movements were sharper, more deliberate, as if the weight of the decision was already beginning to take its toll. "Have you found anything new?" Emily asked, her voice breaking the silence. David glanced up at her, his eyes focused but distant. "Not yet," he replied, "but we're getting closer. We need to stay focused." Emily nodded, but inside, she was struggling to keep up. She had never been part of something like this before, so full of secrets and half-truths, where loyalty was a currency that could be bought and sold without a second thought. The world she had known, the one where she could count on people to be who they said they were, had crumbled overnight. She was surrounded by lies, and every day, the stakes seemed to get higher. "Do you think we're going to find out who it is today?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. David didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat back in his chair and looked out the window. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but I do know that we're running out of time. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it gets." Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. "What happens if we don't find out who it is?" she asked. "If we fail?" David's gaze flickered toward her. His expression didn't change, but Emily could sense the weight behind his words. "We don't fail," he said, his voice low but firm. "Failure is not an option. If we don't find them, everything will collapse." Emily swallowed hard. The pressure was suffocating. She had never been in a situation where the consequences of failure felt so dire. It wasn't just about her own life anymore. It was about the people who depended on David, the empire he had built, the trust he had placed in the wrong people. It was all on the line. "We can do this," Emily said, though her own voice sounded unsure to her ears. "We'll find out who it is. We'll fix this." David's eyes softened for a brief moment, a flicker of something almost human passing through them. "I know we will," he said, the rare vulnerability in his voice almost startling. "But we have to be careful. One wrong move, and it's over." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She had no idea what the future held, but she was starting to understand the gravity of the situation. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was in this, for better or for worse. And there was no going back. "Let's do it," she said, more to herself than to David. David didn't respond immediately. Instead, he picked up his phone and made a call. Emily watched as he spoke in low, controlled tones, his words measured and precise. He wasn't the same man she had met just days ago, the one who had seemed so distant, so cold. Now, he was a man who was clearly on the edge, his determination stronger than ever. Emily could feel it too. The stakes had never been higher, and the clock was ticking. Whatever came next, she knew she had to be ready. She had no choice but to trust David, and trust that he would lead them through the storm that was closing in around them. The hours leading up to the meeting felt like an eternity. David and Emily had spent the morning preparing, gathering every shred of evidence they could find, but something still gnawed at Emily. She kept wondering if they were missing something crucial. It was like they were playing a high-stakes game of chess, and every move they made was critical. As they made their way to the office of the suspect, the air between them was thick with anticipation. Emily could feel her pulse quickening, but she tried to stay calm. The consequences of failure were too high to let fear take over. "You ready?" David asked, his voice steady but carrying an edge that told Emily just how much was riding on this. "I have no choice," she replied, her own voice quieter than usual. David gave a short nod, his jaw tightening. The elevator ride up felt like the longest one of Emily's life. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her, but there was no turning back now. As they stepped off the elevator, David led the way, his steps confident and purposeful. Emily followed closely behind, trying to keep her mind focused. She couldn't help but feel the uncertainty that clung to her. Who could they trust? And if they confronted the wrong person, what would happen? The door to the office opened, and they entered. The man sitting behind the desk was familiar to David, but Emily had never seen him before. His presence was imposing, and his eyes were cold as they locked onto David. "David," the man said, his tone neutral but laced with something darker. "You've come." David didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We need answers," he said, his voice hard. The man didn't flinch. "I'm not sure what you're looking for," he replied, his gaze flickering briefly to Emily before returning to David. "You've been leaking information," David said bluntly. Emily's heart skipped a beat. It was as simple and as direct as that. The man's eyes hardened, but he didn't deny it. "You have no proof," the man said, "and you know better than to accuse me without it." David's expression remained unchanged. "You know how this works. I don't need proof when I have the facts," he said, "and you're not getting away with it." The man stood up, his body tense with anger. Emily could feel the tension between them crackle in the air. It was like watching two predators about to clash, both waiting for the other to make the first move. "You think you can just walk in here and accuse me?" the man growled. "I've been loyal to you for years." David's eyes flashed with fury, but his voice remained steady. "Loyalty means nothing when it's a lie," he said coldly. The man seemed to take a step back, his face paling slightly. "You're making a mistake, David. I have nothing to do with this." Emily could see the subtle shift in the man's demeanor. He was losing control. David took a step forward, his gaze never wavering. "You made your choice. Now you'll deal with the consequences." The man stood frozen for a moment, and then, finally, he broke. "All right," he muttered, his voice low and defeated. "You want the truth? It wasn't me. It was someone higher up." David's expression didn't change, but Emily could feel the tension lifting ever so slightly. "Who?" she asked, her voice sharp. The man hesitated, clearly calculating whether to give them the information they needed. "You don't understand," he said finally. "It's bigger than any of us. There are people pulling the strings, people you don't know about." David stepped closer, his voice low but insistent. "Tell me who now." The man looked between them, his eyes shifting nervously. "I don't know their names, but I know where to find them." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. This was the breakthrough they needed, but it was far from over. They were getting closer to the heart of the conspiracy, but the danger was far from over. David looked at Emily, his gaze full of purpose. "We're not done yet," he said quietly. "But we're closer." Emily nodded, her mind spinning. She didn't know what would come next, but she was ready. There was no turning back now. They had crossed the line, and now, there was only one thing left to do. Finish what they had started.